Everybody okay?
Do I need to give you a minute?
Yeah.
It does take a little bit of time to process. I will.
Demi is here to help you through the next 20, 25 days.
There's a hotline.
I can only imagine what the conversations have been like, and I'm so happy to be having one with you.
Thank you.
I would love to know, Coralee, your filmmaker here, I would love to know what your introduction to her was and how she introduced this film to you. Did she say, or did she send it to someone and tell you just to read it? Or did you have a conversation with her first? How did it all work?
Well, so the interesting is my agent sent me the script and he said, I don't want to tell you anything about it. I think you just need to read it. He said, there's something here, I'm not sure, but I think you just need to read it and then let's talk about it. And once I read it, I fully understood, one, the challenge of even trying to describe it, to even really bring it into a succinct, frame, and I loved it. It was, as it is in the film, it was a very intriguing, very detailed script. And it's a very personal story for Coralee. I think in many respects, Elizabeth is Coralee, and Margaret's character, Sue, is the girl that she experienced at that time that she was pitted against. And so there was aspects of that in her exploring this subject that I think really also struck me deeply, even though I don't feel I don't feel like I am Elizabeth. I mean, she has no family, no friends, no life but her work, but I totally understood that and I related very deeply. It really resonated, the impact of the value system she was placing on everything in her life that was external.
When you first spoke with her, what were your first questions that you wanted answered?
I read this and I really thought, okay, this could be amazing, but it could also be a fucking disaster. Because conceptually, how do you really bring, you're introducing so many elements. I mean, it had such a depth of raw vulnerability and honesty dealing with this subject matter that I think is really an important one. And, but then it opened up into 30 gallons of blood being sprayed. And I just didn't know. And so a lot of it was really, Coralee as a director is a very visual director, very symbolic. And so I think a lot for her was really wanting to spend time with each of us, really expressing just the depth of her understanding of it from a very detailed visual way. And in a way left a lot from an actor's point of view, that it was left to us to really create kind of the deeper heart and depth of who this woman, it isn't two, but we are one, and to bring that aspect to life. But a lot of it was her just really taking me through visually what she was wanting from the close-ups. And in fact, she started often entire scenes this close. Not an actress favorite.
How did you get used to that, or did you not?
I don't know if you do. I think you just adjust because, I think we've all done enough where you're used to starting a little wider, you get some spatial relationship, you understand kind of where things are. And when a camera is starting this close and you're boxed in, but I think in an interesting way, that was much more comfortable for Coralee. Like she saw doing, wide masters as almost a waste of time, which was definitely odd.
Took some getting used to. Who's your support system when you're making a decision like whether to do this? I'm assuming you're talking about Kevin Huvane when you said your agent sent it to you. Is he the person? Do you have friends or trusted people? Whose ears were you bending before you said yes?
So, Kevin Huvane is definitely in there. Scott Metzger, who is actually now a manager, but he's the one that originally sent it. But I think that there was, just a general real interest in this. Like there was, an energy around it. At the same time, some caution about it, because really it was a roll of the dice, to know. I mean, I did really enjoy and watched Coralee's first film, Revenge. So I got a sense of just, her style, her kind of way of storytelling. And so my team generally, it's like I love collaborating. To me, that's one of the greatest joys. And I find that I equally like to do that. I bounced this off Scott Metzger, and I spent a lot of time talking it through. And but in truth, you just have to go back. Sometimes there's something in this case when you recognize something that scares you in just that right way. And when I say scare you, I think fear is an incredible reflection of information. It tells us when we're in danger, and it also tells us when something taps into the type of fear that is a vulnerability. It's something that's pushing you to step out of your comfort zone. So in my knowing, I knew that if she felt I was right, that I was going to say yes. So it didn't take a lot of conversation.
I'm so glad you ran toward the fear, because look what has resulted. I saw an interview that you gave, I think it was Graham Norton, the interview that I'm talking about, and he was asking you about the film, and I liked the phrase that you used, that your hope was that this was a film that could move the needle a little bit. You said something like, no one film can completely change everything, but when it comes to cultural conversations around aging, I think move the needle was the phrase that you used, and I loved it. I'd be curious to know, is that something that you hoped could happen from when you initially read the script? You're like, oh, that's what hopefully this movie could do? Or is it more since you've seen the finished product that you've hoped for that or felt that way?
I think in the process of making it, it's more just the recognition that it had something that I felt resonated with us as human beings, that there was something in this that we all related to. And for me, that really was in the foundation of the violence that we can hold against ourselves, that harsh criticism, that, and the idea that she created something of a physical manifestation. Like, what would it look like if we were able to create this externalized, idea of the words when we're dissecting ourselves, when we're, in that space of harsh criticism, that compare and despair? What would that look like? And as I looked at that deforming aspect of the character, I realized that there was more to your point. It's something that I can look at now after, but it wasn't that it was completely absent from the thoughts. I think in the process of doing it, it's really more about just being able to connect to the truth within it that is within me.
Given that the tone throughout is so heightened, so extreme at times, and this kind of dovetails with the close-up discussion, I think, but how did that affect your job and how you worked, given of what Coralee was doing with this ultra-heightened tone?
I mean, I think a lot of it was, I really, knew that I really had to do my pre-production work. I had to really go through every page so that I knew day one that I could find ways of being alive in every moment. Because, one of the unique aspects of this is that most of my scenes were alone. I didn't have someone else that I was working off of. I didn't have that kind of thing to kind of feed you. And so that internal life was, not that it isn't always important, I think it is, but in this case, it was really essential so that it didn't become just a two-dimensional character.
Did you schedule it? I was going to ask you about working alone, because that is one thing that struck me. Was the schedule such that you had most of the solo scenes together, and then the scenes with Dennis and Margaret, or was it all scattered?
So no, literally, I mean, we shot in Paris and we were there 5.5 months. And so, and 5 months, almost 5 months shooting. And so the way the schedule worked, especially because we had a lot of prosthetics, and I think even just in what Coralee, I think, felt she needed. So Margaret and I felt like we had days where it was like tap in, tap out. You do the first half, I'm doing second half, and vice versa. So we jumped back and forth like that.
How did you work with Margaret, given the fact that you are one? What kind of conversations did you have beforehand, throughout the shoot, to make sure that it was of a piece, as it were?
Well, first of all, I adore her. I love her. It was a joy working with her. And when Coralee spoke to me about who she was considering, it also gave me an incredible reassurance, because I knew that she from the get-go wasn't looking just to find somebody who had a look on the outside, that what Margaret was going to bring to it was already going to be nuanced with incredible depth. The amazing thing for Margaret and I, so I worked with her mother on one of my first films, which was, she knows my daughters. And so the first time that we met in person, I think we felt already that we had a connection, we knew each other, and we didn't really have to have any lengthy dialogue. I think that we are very similar in our approach. I think we both had I think we both jump in feet first. We're not afraid to get messy or dirty. And the only thing we did, in the very beginning, I was talking about it earlier today, we did this funny little exercise class where they were having us throw a ball back and forth. That was an interesting kind of thing of trust. But I think, look, we just had an innate understanding and really looked out for each other. I think Coralee was so focused on the visual that I think we really needed to have each other's backs, literally. Move your leg a little bit there, just that'll cover things. I mean, at one point in the scene where, she's going into stasis when we're doing the switch, and I'm naked on the floor, it's a hard floor, Margaret's, naked, falling on top of me, and Margaret said, "Thank God we like each other, this would be really awkward."
Was it St. Elmo's that Andy was in?
Yeah.
Right, I remember her in that.
Yeah.
Right, I remember that. Yeah, she came, I remember her.
Pardon me, allergies.
Oh, gosh.
I apologize.
How did you all make sure that on those days where you are on the floor, as you're talking about, that it was a safe environment that was created on that set? Were there fewer crew members on certain days than others? How did you work all that out?
Well, we didn't have what seems to be common now, an intimacy coordinator. We didn't have that, but yes, they kind of limited the crew, but we spent a lot of time before we ever started shooting, kind of laying out the groundwork. And I had an experience on Indecent Proposal with Adrienne Lyne, where we structured things so that, as opposed to going, we're showing this much butt, this much boob, where it doesn't allow you to feel free, where in our deal, we all had an understanding and agreement. This is what we're looking to accomplish. This is what's important for telling the story. And so that we had the ability, once it was edited, to be able to say if anything looked like it was too much or we weren't entirely comfortable. Again, knowing the framework of what was, and I find that has worked very well, even though studios and productions are very nervous about that. And in both of the cases of my experience, I didn't ask for anything to be changed.
Wow.
Not that I was crazy about the ass shot of me, but I appreciate the importance of what it's serving in the film.
I also am sure that the fact that it's a female filmmaker must have, I hope, given you a little bit more of a sense of comfort.
It didn't. Maybe it's this particular female.
Right.
I don't think it just wasn't in her natural, but that's why, you know, it doesn't matter if it's not there in that place, you find it somewhere else. And so Margaret and I found it with each other. The hair and makeup team, like, you know, some of the camera department, you find it in other ways.
People. That's
You
great.
find your people.
My favorite thing is someone said, like, you know, people are like, oh, there's gross out scenes in The Substance, and someone said, well, the grossest thing is Dennis Quaid eating the shrimp.
100%. By the way, I had to sit across from him. He ate 4 pounds. It was perhaps one of the most violent scenes, I think, in the entire film.
And the sound
It was
effects.
so gross.
I wonder if he might
And he loved it. He loved every moment of it. I don't even think Coralee realized like how deep of a metaphor it was for his character, ripping the heads off, discarding the rest. It's, yeah.
And I mean, given the fact that you both have been doing this for decades, had you gotten to know him over the years? You must have crossed paths throughout the years.
I mean, for sure. I hadn't seen him in years, and you know, it's in our journey with this, Ray Liotta was originally set to play this role, and who also would have been absolutely incredible. And you know, we lost him literally the week before he was supposed to come over. And so Dennis stepped in with such gusto, and it's very different. It's a totally different, but I think he brought such a wild life, and I mean, he was so all in. And when he arrived, we had already been there, I don't know, almost 3.5 months. So it was also like a little breath of crazy fresh air. Him in his tight Dolce & Gabbana suits.
Listen, it worked for me. I have a couple of last questions, and then we're going to open it up to you also. Start thinking about, well, I see so many friends in this audience. It's crazy. So I'll open up to some questions from you guys in a second. So I'd just be so curious to know, having gone through this experience, and I had no idea it was 5.5 months, what was your reaction when you first saw the finished product?
Well, the first time I had seen a couple of versions, and then the first completed version was actually in Cannes, in a 2,000 person cinema. And I think I was in such awe. I literally let go of any expectations. I didn't know. And I remember Margaret was 2 seats over from me, and especially when the end, which is so wild. But throughout the reaction, we just kept looking at each other like, oh my God, I can't believe it. And I in truth, I just felt extremely humbled. You know, I didn't know if the extreme places that it went would take away from kind of the importance and intensity, and in fact the beauty is that it almost brings you some relief so that you have a little bit of room to kind of process you know, the deeper message, which is for me the importance of not wasting time focusing on all that you're not, when you could be celebrating the beauty of all that you are, the uniqueness of us as individuals.
It must be, over the last 6 months or so, a fascinating mini psychological experiment for you to encounter audiences here in this country, in Europe, male, female, younger, older, and catch a glimpse of what everyone's different reactions to this are. Are you getting a sense of a difference between like an American response and a French response to this movie, or can you generalize?
I feel like it's actually been pretty universal, actually. You know, this is going to open in France November 6th, but I mean, you know, they love horror over there and love the bizarre. And so, but in general, no, across the board, it's been pretty similar. We'll get a real reflection after Halloween. I mean, the memes have been off the charts. They're killing me.
Do you have a favorite?
And there've just been so many. I mean, Gene Wilder and Jerry Allen. That one is a great one. Have you not seen that?
No. As
Yeah, it's like starting with one and then.
was
Oh my God.
I I get it now. That's great. Oh, I'm gonna go and search on Instagram or something.
And I wanted to share one thing that was super moving for me. I was flying to New York and was just getting settled in my seat, and a young male flight attendant came by and he said, "Oh, I just saw your film and you were great." And he said, and I have to say, it really changed how I was approaching myself. And I realized I needed to be kinder. I was doing all this crazy stuff and dieting and doing this stuff, and I realized I just needed to stop and be nicer. And for me, that's what I was talking about I don't expect this to be an overnight cultural shift, but it is the idea that we could be a part of putting down a few pieces of the pavement that is bringing about a shift. And that shift has to come not from the outside, but it has to come from within each of us.
Yes. And at the risk of making you a tad bit uncomfortable,
Go
what's
ahead.
been your reaction?
You think I could be more uncomfortable? I sat through 9.5 hours of prosthetics. Seriously, not anything, please.
What's been your reaction to this chorus of people, both critics and people watching this movie, who say this is the best work of your career? Are you like, damn right it is, or are you kind of shocked and pleasantly surprised by the response to the performance?
You know, it's just nice. Like, I think it's so important to keep right-sized, stay present, and in appreciation, and just in the joy, really in the joy, and know that a career is not it's not one thing. It's a journey, and so it's being in the ride of it and not making it too much, but also not making it too little.
What do you all want to know? Yes.
Your memoir was so beautifully authentic, and it strikes me that that was an anchor, maybe, that led to this. And I wondered if you could talk about work like this has such purpose, and the gift. You know what I mean? It's such a gift in of itself. But can you talk further about the times when you're waiting, the times when you're doubting, and can you also say something to those of us performers who are getting older and haven't broken through? Do you know what I'm saying? And anyway, yeah.
Well, there's a lot there. Well, first, one just interesting thing is that in my memoir, I talk a lot about my own experience with really being in a lot of judgment of myself and my body, and placing too much value in how my body looked, and as if that was who I was. And in fact, when I met with Coralee 6 times before she offered this to me. And I think this was so personal and so precious to her that I think she was really just trying to make sure the actors that she chose really understood it. And at a certain point, I realized there's nothing I could say to her that would give her that reassurance. And so I gave her my book. And she said that's what made the difference in her knowing that I had walked through that. To the other part about, you have to just, if it's something you love, then we keep suiting up and showing up. I've walked through like points where I literally thought maybe I'm complete. Maybe this is, not that I'm done or I'm retiring, but maybe this journey is complete for me. And then I realized if I wasn't sure if that was the case, then I needed to inject as much energy and focus as possible. It's for me just a journey of I'm a truth seeker, and I think that, and at the same time, it's holding an intention, but then letting go.
Thank you. Yes, in the table here.
Thank you so much for all your work. It's been incredible since the beginning, since I started following your career. My question personally, and probably a lot of people in the audience would like to know, when you approach your characters, do you try to find something inside of you that resonates with the character, or are you trying to learn about the character through other sources?
The question is whether she likes to find something that resonates with her in her characters, or does she like to kind of learn about the character as she's planning the performance? performance?
I think both. I think that, going through a script with a character and finding moments in your life that may not be the same as what's happening, but where the feeling is the same, and really kind of using that as things to kind of, again, give it real life. And I mean, I did that very in depth on this. And, but I think it also depends on the character. When I just did Feud, I was playing a real person. And there's a whole different level of responsibility, I feel, that comes with that, and finding the ways to kind of bridge that. So sometimes it is finding it more from the outside in, and then kind of going more inward, and sometimes it's the reverse. It just depends.
Yes, sir.
What does the flesh suit smell like?
The
What
flesh.
is
The flesh suit,
What does it smell like, the fresh suit?
the prosthetic. What do
So
they smell?
mine or Margaret's? It doesn't smell bad. Maybe when you've been in it for a while. No, it's just kind of latex and rubbery smelling. I will definitely say reading the prosthetics on the page is a lot easier than doing it. I mean, and I'm glad I experienced it, for sure.
I'm sure. Yes, here in the second row.
Hi, thank you so much. What would you say is like the thing that you were most sort of nervous about going into this project, and sort of opposite to that, what do you feel you took away the most from this project?
What was she most nervous about, and what did she take away from this project?
I think going in, I knew that this was not about showing that I would be highlighted in the most glamorous, beautiful way, that it was really about opening up myself to the most vulnerable, raw place, and physically and emotionally, and just what that was going to take, and being exposed with cameras up my nose, and there's always a certain level of vanity, and that kind of knowing that you're sharing that part of yourself that we sometimes don't necessarily want everyone to see. And so I think that level of vulnerability, but I also think that it was the equal measure. That was the part of stepping out of my comfort zone. And in equal measure, it's the liberation that I was able to get on the other side. Because it allowed me to let go a little bit more of the judgments that I hold against myself, the dissecting that I can do.
I thank you all for being here. Thank
One
you
more
all.
here?
Yeah, okay, one more.
Piggybacking on what you just said, you were there for 5 months, you shot. And my question for you was, to be that raw, first of all, your work was amazing.
Thank
to be
you.
that raw and to go into the dark, ugly part of yourself and then have to sit for 5 months and do that, how did you decompress? Because you're sitting with that for so long. How do you decompress on a daily basis?
The question is how she decompressed on a daily basis from being in such a dark place for 5 months in this film.
I mean, I think, one, it was interesting, and I always believe that I kind of look at life as everything is happening for you, not to you. And so as I was there, I was not there with any of my family. I wasn't there with any of my normal support system. And, part of the decompressing was just that time alone, like really like kind of going. And in truth, I had my teeny tiny little dog. I really do have to give her the credit, because she really was like my anchor, to have like this little creature that was there for me. Because this was probably one of the hardest shoots I've ever had. Seriously.
Thank you again. Thank you
Thank you
all.
guys.